Thank you for coming for another recovery update meeting. We have a pretty good agenda tonight, and we'll get into that in just a second. First of all, I won't neglect to introduce myself. My name is Kevin Gates, and I'm the information officer for the recovery team. So tonight, if we have a look at the outline slide, we'll see that we have a quick update about this upcoming preparedness event and about the grants, and then we're going to jump into some more in-depth content from the environmental pillar, followed by some slides from our regional emergency preparedness program, or rather emergency program, and followed by some updates on the 2019 preparedness plan. So very briefly, on the grant front, the province and the federal government have started rolling out their announcements for this season. So for example, Kelowna received some confirmation on their DMAF proposal. We haven't received anything yet on ours. So we're expecting, although we have no idea when it will come, that in the next period here before June, we'll receive word back any one of these weeks. Like I said, they're rolling, so you may see in the news increased talk about other communities getting successful grants. We're of course hoping to be successful, but we don't know when we'll receive word about Grand Forks. Preparedness, we have a series of events coming up April 12th and 13th, and some of them involve food like a pancake breakfast or brunch, and perhaps some hot dogs, depending on who we can get on board. So we're looking forward to that, and of course the more important pieces there, which is we'll have some demonstrations on sandbagging, for example, some talk. We're hoping to bring in some of the Fire Smart folks to talk about how your interface zone around your property can be improved to decrease your risk of fire, and other general preparedness themes for both fire and flood are our two major disasters in this area. So please stay tuned for more information in the paper as well as on the website for events generally in the week of April 8th to 14th. But specifically right now we have some earmarked for the 12th and the 13th. And now we'll hear from Nicole and Mike from the environmental pillar. And I believe they have a slide after this. Yes.
Hello everyone. So tonight we'll give you a quick update of what the environmental pillar's been up to these last long months. So this is Mike Tolis, if you don't already know, and I'm Nicole McCallum. And Jessica Meads couldn't be here, but she's on her way to Mexico, so she's not missing us too much, I don't think. Yeah, so first with some good news update, we had a very successful debris removal of the two highest priorities, so those were the trucks. So the first one was in Johnson's Flats, just on the south end, and the other one was at the very end of Almond Gardens Road east. And I just want to say thank you. No, too fast, Kate. Go back. I just want to say a quick thank you to all the residents who live around there and their collaboration of getting the best strategy to get in the equipment and get them out. And also to Manfred and Midnight Towing and his crew, because it went perfectly and wonderfully, and we didn't lose any bits and pieces of the trucks along the way, so that went very well. So the next piece is we have the snow melting a little bit. So before the water comes back up, you might see some debris down by the river. You can definitely tell us about that, and we can try and get that out as quick as possible. If there's any machinery required, then we will have to get a Section 11 from the province and get permission. And of course, if you see active dumping or pollution, call the RAP line so the province knows about it, and it's really easy to look up, so report all poachers and polluters. And yeah, thank you, Nora, for submitting that photo of that debris so we can get that out as well. And we might be doing another cleanup party like we did in the fall, but it looks like the river's coming up a little bit. We were just in the Grammy today removing some things that Hank sent in to our attention. So just a quick reminder, what is a riparian zone? What am I talking about? So essentially anything below top of bank, it's usually quite clear because it's the high water mark. So just looking at that cross section, you see the river there, and then it slowly slopes up towards the bank, and the trees are there. So just in between where the water is and the shore and the rocks, and anything below top of bank would be where we would have to get a section 11. And then you have a little bit of a setback, which is the riparian zone. And we've also had a suspected loss of potable water reported in the west boundary. So if anybody is dealing with water issues right now, please come and talk to me about it. Interior Health does do free water sampling services. So if you were concerned with your groundwater during and after the flood, and you still haven't gotten it back up to Interior Health's guidelines where you can drink it, please come talk to me. We're just in the midst of getting some funding to do a program for mitigation and check out exactly what's going on around down there. And as you can see, the photo's a bit small, but if you do suspect that you're having groundwater issues, now that the snow's melted a bit, you can just kind of do a spot check for any cracks, or sometimes when the water comes through, it can actually move the soil, and that's a really easy way for coliforms and E. coli to get directly into your water source. Now it's Mike's turn.
Yeah, so the other big project that has been ongoing for a number of months now was the McRae Creek project. So it was flagged early on by the engineers as something that needs further review. We went and looked at it the first time, I think, in June, and then we've been working on getting the permitting in place to be able to do something there for 10 months or something like that. It's been quite a long process. I guess there was a culvert blowout on McRae Road, and then it washed out a log jam further down the creek. So a lot of sediment. That picture there is the sediment plume that was out into the lake, which was pretty substantial. So a couple of weeks back, we finally had everything in place, and we had the contractor go in and start excavating the material from there. So over the course of a week, they worked through the weekend, which was super great. We pulled out 328 loads of gravel from the creek bed. It was awesome to not work when the creek was flowing, and then at the very end, the last day, the creek did start flowing, which was actually good to see where the channel that was kind of designed and dug out actually flowed and how it worked. So it was quite a long process. We started the section 11 and then realized over time we needed 4 different other permits. So these are all of the permits that were required to do the work in the creek. The sediment removal and the channel sloping was completed, was it 2 weeks ago now? And that was kind of the finished product. So now we're just kind of, I'm really interested to see how the flow and how the water flows this year. The homeowners are pretty happy that their homes are going to be protected. Like these houses were, as soon as the water started flowing and a little bit of rain in October, there wasn't any water running in the creek anymore. It was going directly through one of the properties. So it was inevitable that impacts were going to be suffered with any kind of melt this year. So yeah, they were pretty nervous. It was getting close to the 11th hour when we were in there doing the work, but we got it finished. And there's a couple of pictures on the next slide that kind of show the before and after. Again, they're a little small, but the top left is from the lake looking up the creek. And there's not really it kind of looks like a road. There's not really a channel there. And then on the top right is what it looked like after. So they excavated the channel at the mouth of the creek. There is about 16 meters from top of bank to top of bank, and about 8 meters wide on the bottom. And then the bottom left is what it looks like kind of from Miller Road, I think it's called. Right at the end of the road, kind of looking out to the lake, and then what it kind of turned into with the actual channel that was dug. So that was a long time in the works, and we're happy that it's wrapped up. There's still a little bit more of a project, not really, kind of a project, to get the all the stuff that we removed. We dumped it on property close by. Because there was road restrictions in place, it was going to take a long time and be very costly to send half loads to where we're going to be using it. But that rock is going to be used in some of the protective works in the city in the upcoming year. So that project's done.
I think there's one last slide and another good announcement. We've received another round of funding. If you need help getting a Section 11 completed, there is a component that the province requires to have a qualified professional come to your property, most likely an engineer and a biologist, and complete a plan to submit along with your Section 11 if you want to do any bank or flood protection, especially if it's below top bank. And yeah, so if you haven't already completed a priority matrix, I know some of you have and have been waiting for the next round of funding, so good news, it's here. That window is closing to come and talk to me and get your priority matrix in. Our next fish window is September 1st to 30th. So that's when you can actually complete the work. And usually for a Section 11, it might just take that long. So after freshet, get an engineer in to look at what exactly their property is doing at the moment, and then get the application into the province, and then most likely by September 1st, you'll have everything neat and tidy and all your permits in order. So yeah, come and talk to me after the meeting. And you can also get a hold of us at plan@kettleriver.ca. And we also have a Facebook page that's still active, even though we're waiting for the watershed planner from the regional district to come in and take that over. So yeah, thank you very much for listening to this update. And if you have any more questions, come talk to Mike or I, and we'll be around for the question period as well.
Great, thank you, Nicole and Mike. So as mentioned, we will have questions at the end of the presentations, and we should have plenty of time for questions tonight. So if you do have anything, we will have a bunch of folks here from the environmental pillar, from the regional district, and also some local politicians in the audience. Could we get hands up who's a local elected official? Thank you. So you have good representation tonight. So if you do have any questions on the political spectrum, feel free to ask those as well. Next up, we have Mark Stevens, who is the interim manager of emergency programs. Programs with the regional district Kootenay boundary. And so he is the guy that's looking out for us during this freshet in terms of looking at preparedness and also moving forward into the fire season.
Thanks, Gavin. Yes. So I am Mark Stevens. I'm the interim manager of emergency programs. I am the one kind of taking over response duties for the regional district on the emergency program file. Tonight, I just wanted to go through kind of some of the information that we're watching, some of the data points that we're watching for the freshet season, freshet 2019, and kind of give you an update on what those numbers look like, as well as some of our activities as to what we're doing to prepare as well. So we'll get the next slide. Yeah, so one of the indices that we look at is the snowpack. So I have two graphs up there on the left-hand, or on your left-hand side. That's from the Grano Creek Snow Pillow, which is one of the mid-elevation snow pillows that's in our basin. The blue line, the very low there, that is the snow water equivalent this year. The green line that's right up at the top, that's last year. And then what we see in the center there, that little purple shaded area, that's the normal. So right now, the boundary area is sitting at 61 or 64% of normal. So we had our mid-month snowpack analysis update, and that's what they were saying for us was 64% of normal. On the right-hand side there, that's the Sentinel Snow Pillow, and that's just south of Grand Forks in the USA. And the black line there at the top, that's this current year's mapping. And then they don't actually show last year's but you can see the 30-year average there as well. You can notice on that one being a lower elevation snow pillow, you can see that it's starting to drop off. And so that's normal for this time of year when you can see the snow starting to melt and starting to run into the creeks and then eventually making its way down into the river. These two graphs here show our current river levels as of this morning. So on the left-hand side, we have the Granby River at Grand Forks gauge, and you can see that it's starting to make its way up. It should be noted, it's hard to see the numbers there, but we're well below where we were last year, and we're just sitting at about a little bit of average right now. And then on the right-hand side, we have Kettle River near Westbridge, and you can see the same thing. You can see that we're starting to creep up again there, but once again, we're still in the normal for that one. And then these two graphs are a little bit of forecast models from United States. On the left-hand side is the Laurier gauge, which is on the Kettle River, just south of Christina Lake there. So the blue line is what was observed, the green line is a forecast, and then the red portion of that line is a trend. Those gray dots that it's just crossing a little bit there, that's the average, and then the kind of the blue triangles near the bottom, that's the minimum that was observed. So you can see that the Kettle River at Laurier there, it's kind of hovering right around the average point. And then when we look at the Kettle River near Ferry, which is just south of Midway there, you can see that it's firmly in the average section there as well. And then this is our local River Forecast Center forecasts. So you can see, once again, the blue line is what was observed, the red line is the forecast, and then we have some other data points along there. So it's almost impossible to see, but there's a little bit of two lines below one line below the kind of teal color there is actually the 1 year return period, so we're well below forecasted for the 1 year return level. And then very up at the very top of that graph, the red dotted line, that was the 2018 peak. So we're well below that. We're starting to come up as we would expect this year, but we aren't entering any flood stages or anything. So what are we doing to prepare for this year? So we have our sandbag stocks on hand, so we have more sandbags at the start of the freshet season than we ever have. We have 130,000 sandbags on hand within the regional district that can be shipped around to various communities. We can also order in more from the province at a moment's notice if we need to. As I said, we're currently monitoring all of our snow pillows, our river gauges, and our weather prediction, or weather forecast, just to keep up to date on those guys. We're working on our flood response plan as well. So this is something that we started early this year, and that is to better prepare for freshets in the future. It's a plan that lays out how we're going to respond and at what levels, so it gives us trigger points with rivers. I'm not going to speak too much to that because I'm going to get Paul up here in a few seconds just to speak to that a little bit more. And one thing that's exciting that the regional district is doing is we are starting our emergency alerting system. So we'll be launching this during the preparedness week. This is a mobile communications system. You can get calls, texts, emails through an app to notify you of evacuation alerts and orders as well. So we're going to be launching that and providing some information on how to register for that during the preparedness week. So at this point, I'll pass it over to Paul, who's going to give you a little bit of update as to where we are with our flood response plan.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Paul Edmonds. I've been working on the flood response plan with the regional district and Grand Forks. There's a number of slides and a number of tables, just giving you an idea of what's in the response plan. I'm going to try and talk about all the other considerations that a emergency operations centre need to think about. And there's a whole series of maps as well, showing different stages of flooding. The urban systems have done the flood model for Grand Forks. We requested a time series map showing what flooded first, and we're actually going to use those for some of the trigger points to try and prioritise resources in the right way, so Mark and his colleagues in Grand Forks and other municipalities can actually think about the actions and then the other actions that need to be organised 2 days in advance, 1 week in advance, and where we are now, hopefully 2 months in advance. So on the slide, some of the considerations I've had to take into account of is knowing what the weather is going to be, which is extremely difficult to predict. We had a special telephone conference just a few weeks ago with the River Forecast Centre, where the uncertainty of weather was discussed. The February cold snap that affected British Columbia wasn't forecast to last 4 or 5 weeks. So the climatologists are having difficulty in understanding where the weather is. How well can we predict? Is it 7 days in advance? Is it 14 days in advance? You know, the El Nino conditions, cooler and warmer, what will we actually receive in the next coming months? Is it going to be storms? Is it going to be a wonderful spring? It's really hard to know. So I'm trying to be very conservative with the triggers to allow time for decision making for the emergency program coordinators and managers to actually make those decisions and put in place actions. So March the 26th today, there is obviously still potential for snow at high levels. Big White had 8 centimetres just 2 days ago. So with this rain that we're seeing, we will be seeing snow at the high elevations. But the good thing, as Mark said, we're at 64%, which is much lower than last year. Those who remember last year's graphs, there was steps 3 times and right up into the first week in May. So we still have to be aware of the snowpack. So there's a little bit of a table, and not to bring it out of context, this is parts of the flood response plan, which shows the provincial average across the coming months, a normal minimal range, and then using the language of be aware and enhanced awareness, that gives the ability for the emergency managers to actually look at all the data and start getting themselves prepared. Not saying there's going to be actions, but I'm sure Mark would say it's more than once a week that you look at this data. So, if you go to the next slide, please. With the data, the river levels, and I'm going to go into a series of maps now and I'll explain them as I go forward. The combined levels, and I've tried to use the same sort of language, be aware, consider actions, and then I've got a minor, moderate, major of where we're going to see flooding. The following maps actually show what happens first so that we can try and plan ahead. And these sort of figures, you know, the Granby at Grand Forks, when we're reaching those 240 cubic meters per second, it will give a trigger, which is a conservative trigger, time for the emergency managers to decide what they need to do. Looking at the weather forecasts, looking at the state of conditions, is it erosion, where are the dikes, and all the risks associated. So this is the first map showing, I'm not sure how well those colours come out. Obviously the black is the river, and then you can see some areas with yellow and green. You won't be able to see the legend at the top, but the yellow is around about 1 meter depth of water. So we're looking at the first points, if you go to the next slide. If you zoomed in on the map, we've got indicator points of knowing where there will be flooding at those early stages. Whether the river will continue rising, again, we'd have to look at what's called the clever model that Mark talked about, and those predictions with the weather and the snow melt, etc., that comes together with it. So we've got some real good trigger points at those lower levels of river flow that we can then look for the future. If you go to the next slide. So, and at 600, you can see that yellow and green starting to expand in different areas. And so we're seeing minor flooding at this point. There's some properties that may receive water, depending how the landscape has changed since 2018 floods. If you go to the next slide. And you can see that we've got more hot zones, as it were, that we need to constrict our resources on. So if you can imagine an emergency manager looking at the clever models and the river forecast centre and the weather forecast, and that flow was at 400, 450, and then he's looking at 600, he or she can see what's going to happen potentially into the future and trying to plan accordingly for it. If you go to the next slide. Obviously, as we go forward, there's an increase of water if it gets to this stage again, and you can see a much more inundation area of the yellows and greens and a few more reds, showing that depth increasing. If you go to the 1,000. The 1,000 mark, the 1,000 cubic meters, is very near where the 2018 flood was, perhaps a little bit lower, but it's very similar to the flood outline that you unfortunately experienced last year. So we can use these maps as those trigger points to help us plan where we need to put emergency measures, where we need to potentially evacuate people, where we need to protect infrastructure, and where we need to obviously notify people of what's happening. If you go to the next slide. Obviously, the information that was used for the maps is a flood model, but we have real data from last year to compare it to, which unfortunately is really good from the model perspective, so we can actually work out what happened with real-time information. It gives us a little bit more confidence when setting trigger points, but I have to caveat that with we have to know what the weather is. Another trigger point is that there are going to be 2 days of rain over 30 mil, which could put so much water into the system, but the emergency managers will have to be aware of that. So that's another condition that goes on top of the response plan. How many days is going to be warm? We've experienced a nice warm spell. It's supposed to, the forecast says it's going to get cooler next week. How cool will it be? What are the flows going to be in the rivers and creeks at the mid-altitudes and the higher altitudes? And obviously, any storm cells that come across April, May is a good time of year for that sort of weather. How heavy will they be? So there's a lot of balancing act with the flood response plan and the emergency measures, but we've balanced it so that they can be conservative in how they plan for the future. I've said still potential for snow. One thing that I've seen being down here every week is that the landscape has certainly changed from last year's flood. The flood model was used using the LiDAR data, like radar. There's a lot of information that was collected then, but the landscape has changed in certain places. And some of the other triggers, there's quite a few areas for erosion. And then we have to look at the dike integrity as well, to where will the flood actually happen. So the small amount of erosion that's happening elsewhere is a very good indicator. I've gone around with a few people, including the fire chief of Grand Forks, to look at all those issues, and that they're going to be in the flood response plan as well as indicators for the emergency managers and local responders to be aware of and watch. There's a planned exercise in April with the stakeholders to make sure everybody knows what they're doing. And I say that in such a way, in my best British sarcasm, if we get everybody in the room, there's no assumptions of who does what. So during the flood, Ministry of Transportation, Flynn Road, EMBC, BC Wildfire, local responders, emergency managers all talk about their actions going through the flood response plan, and everybody's clear what they need to do and when they need to do it. We've also surveyed quite a few sites, all the neighbourhoods, to what can be protected. Those plans are just being finalised and given to the regional district for potential emergency measures, which include sandbags, tiger dams and HESCO bins, which are the 1 metre by 1 metre wire baskets with liners inside. There's a few places that they can go in. Everybody saw the tiger dams last year. So there's definitely places that can be protected depending on the depth of the water and whereabouts in the Grand Forks and the rural area. We've also looked at using the maps, looking at different priorities if we have to evacuate, and also the evacuation route points as well. As you can see, remember from those maps, you saw the yellow and green going across a few roads. That's to have that information ahead of time for planning purposes is good for the local responders to be aware of the potential depth of water on that road, and also the alert and notifying of the public, which Mark talked about, the notification system. The outlook, we don't know what the weather is going to throw at us over the next 2 months. We have to be aware of that. It has been very good up to this point. I don't want to be the doomsayer, but I work in emergency, so I always look at worst case scenarios. But looking at the facts, 64% of snowpack, the rivers are rising. The last few days, let's just be aware of what's going on. Okay, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Paul. So we've got at least an hour for questions. And so far, it seems pretty silent out there, so hands up, who's got a question? I see a question back there, so we'll do the same things before. We'll have a few questions. We'll continue to work through until we hit a natural close to the questions. So on this side, we have Rachel with the mic. I'll be on this side. We'll come to you with the microphone. And again, you can ask questions either of the folks here from the regional district, from the flood recovery team, or from your local elected representatives. Let's start with one of Rachel's side.
Hello. Margot Evers. We live downriver in the nursery. One of the things we did notice this after post-flood was the river has changed a lot. And some of the changes unearthed an amazing amount of garbage in the river. Mr. Clean here has already pulled out a lot, and we want to know what to do with some of it, you know, like ridiculous big pieces of metal and old bicycles, and like, is there a river junk drop-off spot that we don't have to pay to bring it to the dump?
Let us hear from the, I don't know if the environmental pillar has an answer. Mike's nodding. Mike's going to come up here and give an answer.
Yeah, we have the, we've been asking people to report to us when you find that sort of stuff. We've had a few, if you go online to the Lightship map, you can actually take pictures and upload them to the site. We check it periodically to see what's been uploaded, but the faster way to get it done is to just let us know. plan@kettleriver.ca is our email. Or, I mean, you're my wife, you could just tell her, she would tell me, we'll figure it out. But yeah, like Nicole said, we were in the river today pulling some stuff out, but we don't have the ability to just, I mean, it'd be a great job to just walk the rivers and find stuff, but you guys that live on the river know better than we do, so let us know, and then yeah, we'll start the wheels in motion to do some cleanup work.
Just wondered what the snowpack is like up in the mountains this year compared to last year and other years.
And Mark will give us an answer on the snowpack.
Yeah, so that was that the first graphs that I showed there with the lines that kind of went up like that.
Way up high.
Yeah, so that's at the Grano Creek is what was called a mid-elevation snow pillow, and then the Sentinel is kind of a lower elevation. And so what we're seeing across southern BC is at or below normal. We're not seeing any above normal snowpacks for this year. Compared to last year where we were seeing 123% of normal, working its way up to 200+% of normal. So this year we are below average.
Hi, from North Ruckel. I know we're waiting till about May before we hear whether or not there's going to be a buyout, but I'm wondering, is there a plan in place if there's not a buyout, like what they're going to do along the river in North Ruckel there? I'm not sure who this one's directed to.
Yeah, I think I'll field it just in the sense that there is no official plan. So the direction that as the flood recovery team we've been given from our government or our local elected representatives has been to pursue those programs until we've exhausted the possibilities. So right now we're waiting to hear back on one grant. It's not the only grant out there. It's not the only option out there, although it's the best one we've identified so far. So our plan from a staff side of things is to continue to pursue the recommendations endorsed by council and by the board of directors until we've exhausted those possibilities. So, well, it's not a complete answer in terms of a contingency of what if there's no money coming from other levels of government. We want to wait and see what happens first before going there, because if this grant doesn't come through, there may be other possibilities of funding.
Thank you, Calvin. Christine Thompson, one of the elected officials. Just a question on the flood mapping that was shown. Does any of that take into consideration groundwater, or is it strictly the river?
There is parts of it that will be groundwater because there's a connection between the river and the low spots, but it's all flood modelling from the river perspective. Those low elevations may rise because of that connection river. You know, south of Ruckle, there's definitely seen some inundation from groundwater because of that direct connection. But it would be very hard to sort of try and plan groundwater flooding.
I want to say something. I really don't, but I do. Hi, Dan Martin. I'm in North Ruckle too. I hate doing this, but I was hoping somebody else would say something. I just find it really frustrating that the people in North Ruckle are being put on hold. And I'm not blaming anybody here, but for 10 months now we've been told we're going to be potentially bought out. And I understand your frustration, but it's killing me. It's killing a lot of my neighbors. We can't get on with our lives. And I just needed to say that it's very frustrating not knowing if I'm going to get bought out or I'm going to live there for 2 more years or going to have to make do, and then have an answer that we're going from grants. Somebody's going to make a decision, and I guess that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, further to that, North Ruckle, it puzzles me why there's never been a plan B for North Ruckle. We just keep getting told, well, we're trying to get money there. If that doesn't work, we'll try and get the money there or there, but there's no plan B as far as like, what if there's no money? And that's what Dan's talking about. We don't know. We're sitting down there right now, you know, what my wife and I were talking today. It's kind of like there's still 2, maybe 3 months before we know if that money's going to come through. And if that's not coming through, then it's going to be another year, 2 years, what, to do it, write another grant and look for money somewhere else. I guess what I'm saying the same thing Dan said. It's just starting to get to me. Why can't someone come up with a plan B and just let us know if no money ever comes through? What's the next thing? What could we do? What can we do in North Ruckle? Like maybe beef up the dike that's already there, that stood for what? 1971 that dike went in. One high water and we're all just put on hold. I'm sorry, but anyway, that's mine.
And thank you. We hear your frustration. I'm actually hoping we can hear from Mayor Taylor about the political process in terms of looking at the direction given to staff and any potential options that that they have politically.
We're frustrated as well. The plan B we talked about it very early on in the game, and it was evident then that preliminary talk of Plan B could potentially undermine Plan A, to keep it simple, and that we needed really to proceed without going deeply into what if we get nothing. But I think we've turned that corner, and I can tell you now that Council is struggling with looking at the possibility of a Plan B. So we're starting to review things from the beginning. I think there's enthusiasm from Council to dive into the details of Plan A, but also to come up with a Plan B. So I'm sorry it's taking so long, but in fact, we need a Plan B on the table at this point, and we're committed to working on it.
If I could just finish then. We're kind of back to where we were 8 months ago. If we're starting to talk about a Plan B, I'll just throw this out there. Save North Ruckle. Find a way to save North Ruckle. When we went to that thing that was down at the art gallery, and I mean, I know I'm kind of sticking a knife in my North Ruckle compadres here, but when we went down to that thing at the art gallery, they had us going from room to room and answering questions on the surveys and all that. One of the things was, they had us describe the perfect neighborhood. Well, close to town, easy walk in, there was all kinds of, right along the river, there was all kinds of stuff, all kinds of points came up, and Nora and I, when we got home, we realized we were describing North Ruckle. We were describing the place that we're being thrown out of so we can be tossed into some other place that they're going to try and just make North Ruckle over again somewhere else, just on higher ground. There's a dike there. And I'm sorry, I'm talking about maybe beef up the dike that's already there. It held for all those decades anyway. I mean, now that means the downtown's going to flood, and you're planning on putting a dike in there anyway. So I'm not quite sure what's so, maybe I'm not the guy, but it just doesn't seem to me to be all that complicated.
I'm just wondering if maybe if some North Rucklodians could be part of the process of brainstorming, because I think the worst part is just feeling like you're just the effect of everything. You have no cause point over your life or your future. We keep trying to kind of keep ourselves all chipper and cheerful, and we'll go with whatever. But if we could perhaps be included in some brainstorming, that would feel good too.
Great, thank you, Nora, and I'm sure the councillors here tonight have heard you loud and clear.
I was just wondering about the response map with the yellow parts. For some reason, none of the yellow was in North Ruckle, and it was very much submerged last year, and people still live there. So is there a response plan for them too? It's just kind of funny it's not yellow.
Yeah, the map was it stopped at 1,000 cubic meters per second. The flood of 2018 was higher than that. And we've got that modelled as well. There is some flood response plans for South Ruckle. North Ruckle, sorry.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. Just to speak as this council, of course, we have grappled with what happened. To some extent, it took us a while to figure out what happened. We're in our 45th week of a state of local emergency, which is one of the longest on record. And it is a strange situation to be in politically. And we're coping with that. And this council, not the previous one, this one, we are beginning to grapple with all the details of what happened, all the engineering that's been suggested and given to us, and we're studying it like mad. I can assure you, it is complicated. And I want you to know that you can go to any counselor or the mayor and tell us what you're thinking. And I'll tell you what I'm thinking, but I can't speak for council. Council's kind of a strange creature, right? 7 brains. So it's hard for 1/7 of the brain to say anything that's too meaningful. But we have really good hearts, and we do hear you, and we know the city is suffering. I personally would ask you, please be patient for, I know you've asked you this already, for a couple more months. We too know that there's a complicated road ahead. I mean, if we get 100% of the grants, oh goody, Plan A worked. If we don't, well, there's going to be lots of head scratching, and there will be lots of opportunities. And believe me, this councillor, and I'm sure my colleagues, will be reaching out to you guys. What do you think we should do? Right? I mean, we've had groups come before us and ask us, what are you going to do for the downtown? Well, we're going to do what we can. And by the way, have you seen what North Ruckle has had to sacrifice? Yeah, so we are all pushing forward with that. And we know there's a lot of sacrifice and sorrow out there. But we are muddling through it. And I have to give my level of support to the flood recovery team, who for 45 weeks in a state of local emergency have been showing up here regularly, right? They have tried to tell you the truth every time. It hasn't been easy, because sometimes they don't know it, right? So they have my support, my vote. A lot of them are local guys, right? But we put our very best forward into this fight, and we're going to continue to do that for you in the next few months. And please don't hesitate to reach out to any councillor or any colleagues of my colleagues. We certainly are willing and eager to listen to you. Okay? Thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you, Councillor. We have a question here that Rachel will get to, and then one up here coming up after that.
I think I'm going to ask the question that everybody's thought of, but nobody said. What do we have to do to embarrass the government enough so they'll actually listen? What do we have to do to tell the rest of the world that we're still in a hell of a mess? We had some coverage near the beginning, and gee, the water dried up and everybody went to bed. They all forgot. There's hardly been any coverage on TV showing the empty houses and the pain that people go through, and the stories that are attached to those things, and the insurance companies that are still ripping people off, and whatever level of government is holding people in limbo. Why does it take so long here, when in some other places, I think it's fairly well documented, that they got answers a lot quicker?
I think at this stage we can but echo your comments that we're frustrated with the wait, and we're looking forward to getting an answer one way or the other from our senior levels of government. And the question on this side.
Yes, my name is Elizabeth Semenov. I lost my husband in November, and we would like to know what to expect, and what discussions have there been about Johnson Flats?
Are you looking from what would happen through our emergency program, or from the longer term grant perspective?
Anything that you have.
Mark, could you answer, or Paul, about the emergency measures that are being looked at?
Yeah. So from the emergency measures for Johnson's Flats, it's extremely difficult to put anything in place there. There's a number of erosion areas that need to be monitored. Then it's going to go into the potential of evacuation. I can't hold that back other than to give you the facts. It's going to be very difficult to put anything down in Johnson Flats to protect the number of houses there. From the grants, though, there was some areas of erosion works, which will certainly help the river stay within its banks.
Absolutely. So there was considerable discussion about Johnson Flats. Council had identified a couple of issues, and engineering recommendations came in for two areas mainly. One of them is erosion protection, preventing the river from taking away the land and cutting across. It's not designed to be a dike, but it would be designed to prevent cutting in. The other measure that was identified and recommended was the purchase of properties. The ones that were able to make it into the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund grant in this round were 3 properties at the north end of 12th Street. And so those are the ones in the proposal. A number of other appraisals were made on the RDKB portion, but there wasn't enough room in the grant to fit all the properties in. And so I think it's an area of further study that's required and dialogue with the regional district and with residents of the city side and the regional district side and with council to look at what the options are and look at what the best practices can be. I want to be conscious of the overall timeline. You know, I look at flood recovery, the way it's done in different provinces around the country and different states in the United States, and looking at what happens. It's very common for mitigation to happen right after a flood, where the plan is already in place. Well, it's not common for it to happen like right away. In New Brunswick, after the floods last year, they had funding in place to initiate a buyout right away. And people were given the choice, you can own the land and stay there, but you won't get disaster financial assistance again. Or you can sell us your house, you won't be able to have anything but an RV there during non-flood season. Or 3, we'll buy it completely and turn it back into floodplain. Those 3 options were provided right away, and they started away on the project. In other places, they're entirely dependent on grants or multi-year studies to prepare dikes and buyouts and that kind of thing. Calgary and High River are good examples. 5 years later in High River, I believe about half of the dikes are built, and some of the neighborhoods are still trying to figure out what the long term will be. So recognizing flood recovery happens, we try and put back the pieces. People are stuck in limbo while they're waiting for grant decisions to be made. And sometimes things take years and years and years. So what Kevin spoke to earlier about continuing focusing on fulfilling what council's decisions are is really important. And council's willingness to engage deeply with these questions and understand what a plan B could be, or what things need to be changed, what funding sources need to be brought. That's where we get our marching orders. So that's where the dialogue comes next. Certainly a lot of ideas have been generated over the last year, but it's really from the perspective of the engineer recommendations and the purpose of the grant. That's the plan that we're given the direction on and where it's going. So basically, stepping back to Johnson Flats, I gave a long answer there. Nothing has been identified yet in the current grant programs for those areas, except the 2 that I identified, but the study continues on it with now that we have the flood model here, the engineers will be helping us with some discussions.
So what are you telling us? Do we wait and see, or do we try to get new pumps to make sure that we can maximize that, or will that help any? What do we need to do?
For this year, the answer is to wait and see. For future years, there will be more study of Johnson Flats, but if you're looking for the next few months, wait and see, listen to the information that comes out of the Regional Emergency Program, because that will be your best information on what's going on for any sort of flooding this year.
Thank you.
Did we have any other questions from this side?
One here.
Two from the other side.
People are asking about Plan B. I want to know if there's anything happening with Plan A if a buyout does happen. Is there any kind of plans for the city to do a land swap or offer land for people? I mean, we don't know where we're going to go if we're going to have to move. Do we have to buy the land on our own? Is there going to be subdivision set up? You know, what do we do?
Excellent question. It's a topic of great discussion. I just had a meeting with Manager of Development and Engineering today. What is in the proposal is for a 1.5-year timeline for doing buyout. So what would be expected at the beginning is discussion with each of the affected landowners and looking at negotiation and that compensation, and B, what are their wishes. So those sessions that were held last fall with Urban Matters about where would you want to be, those need to be renewed once that reality of that option coming through comes to be. Because you might want to have room for a garden, you might want to downsize, you might want to upsize. What are the different options that are available coming from the market? What are the options available coming from other options? And then, how many units are we looking at potentially moving? Because that, I think, is a very real possibility for 30 or 40 of the units. There could be moving options. I talked with the building inspector about that today. So we'll be bringing forward some discussions to council over the next month and a half to start to sketch all that out. You're right about servicing and city land possibilities, and both of those things need to be sketched out. But we're basically, recognizing that it's a 1.5-year long timeline. Try and figure out the financial details for the individuals first, and then see how many we need to accommodate in the next 1.5 years, next 2 years before the moving would need to happen.
Good evening, my name is Gordon Shaw, I'm in Johnson Flats. The main road down there, 12th Street, was, as everybody, some are aware, was under 2 feet of rushing water during the flood of 2018. That road today has paid a terrible price because of that. And I don't know if, I see the city came down and threw some coal patch and a couple of holes down there, but that road really needs to be looked after by some sort. I contribute pretty heavy into the tax base of the city, and I don't see too much return on my, as far as street upkeep happens. So maybe the city could come down and evaluate that thing and tell us what we can expect in the future, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, and message received. We will come have a look.
Thank you. Back in the early stages, when their meetings first started, some of us indicated that we might have a house that's movable, and at that time, we were told by one of the members of council that we will trade you a service lot for a service lot. Now, anything further on that?
So there's no definite plans for that. I don't know which member of council you were speaking to, but I would say at this point, the answer that Graham gave about looking into different options but not having decided on anything, and bringing forward some dialogue with council over the next couple of months here is where we're at right now.
Thank you.
All right, let's go with third call for more questions.
I'll try. I am George Seminoff from Johnson Flats, and I have a different concern. Across the road from me, I'm on 59th and 12th. It's kind of a low spot, and over the years they've been hauling junk, branches, stumps and everything, and chips, and then they push it down and build it up on the bottom. Well, actually creates a dam when the water came down 12th and into there. And how much of that's allowed, and I'll be in the lake if the water comes up like that again and there's more buildup.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. It sounds like you're talking about a private property owner building up a portion of their land.
Yes.
And it essentially, especially in a more rural area like that, there are few city bylaws that apply to just how you treat your landscaping or what you do on your property. So if it falls under something like an unsightly property premise, you know, there's options there. But if it's really just landscaping the land and raising it up, then there aren't a lot of city bylaws that apply to that.
So what's going to happen? They can build it up more, bring more branches and stumps and pile it up higher and create a dam?
You know, it's hard to say without knowing the specifics of the property, but speaking generally, if it is just a matter, if it doesn't get into a retaining wall or things like that, you know, private property owners are free to do quite a few things on their property that the city doesn't regulate.
So who did I get information from?
I would encourage you to come to City Hall to speak with the Manager of Bylaw Services if you wanted some more information about the bylaws that do apply in the city.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, is that the end of the questions? One more in the back.
Just to clarify, where we live, or did live, in the 40s, I believe, my father-in-law came searching for a place to move to from Alberta. And it ended up that it was a whole city block that was purchased. And my understanding is that there are rumors, there are people criticizing people for living there. Well, the people who bought the property at that time lived there, didn't know that probably that it was a floodplain. Since then, at one time there was a moratorium on building, but then the bylaws were changed and included certain provisions for people to build, and I think from what I am hearing that most of those people were not affected in the same way that the people that had been there originally, so, or many years ago. Just so people understand, it's you just don't move that easily. So it's George can probably tell you how many years since they lived in the area. I came later, but that's just to clarify for people.
Thank you. I did want to recognize one of the resolutions made by council, and a recommendation from the engineer was to seek funding for support for people to elevate their houses if it's feasible. This is something that's a practice now in the United States in flood-prone areas. It wasn't able to be eligible for the grant that we applied for this year, but that is an important factor, and we've had discussions with house moving and house lifting companies to look at feasibility, so that discussion continues. So recognizing in areas of low to moderate risk, where the property may still flood, there is a good rationale for supporting a raising of homes. In areas of high risk, of course, you want to avoid it, but moderate to low risk, and that's what these flood maps will help with decisions on as we go forward and seek further funding.
In our case, my husband had taken the trouble to build a berm and have pumps. And so up to this point in 2018, we were not affected in an adverse way because he, being a carpenter, knew approximately how to set the house, which was set above the water levels at that time when our house was built, which was in the late 60s. And so, like I say, we were protected, but there were different breaches along the way this last time. And so we were adversely affected with groundwater as well as the river. Thanks.
One more thought about that. Should we get to the place of raising houses and the feasibility of that? The last thing I heard, the engineer said that we need to be up on a slab. Well, a slab to me in a floodplain is stupid because it takes up a large footprint of ground to put a slab down that will actually stay. Why can't we just build crawl spaces or put it up on cinder blocks and on one end put a door and on the other end put a door, and if you're concerned about flooding, open the doors and let it run through. But you have to have something on the other end like a hole in the dike so the dang thing can actually get back into the river like it did in 48 without drowning everybody. And someone said here not long ago that down south they do a lot of this. Well, that might be considered, or a plan B that we should be looking at. Not the slabs, but a way to raise your house that would allow the river to run past for the 4 to 6, 8 or 10 hours that it would take, and the flood is over for another year, should it ever get to be that high. That would make way more sense than hauling in thousands of yards of dirt to put a slab down.
Thank you for your comments. Alrighty. I don't see any other hands waving in the air. So I do hope we've given everyone enough time to ask the questions they may have had. If you're looking to ask questions another time, feel free to be in touch with the Flood Recovery Office. It's down just across from Granby Dental, so you can find folks there. Please do make an appointment if you have a complicated question, just so that they can be sure that someone is there to answer your question and set aside the time to do that. The slides from tonight will be up on the website, bfre.ca. So if you're looking to download them, they're up there. If for whatever reason you are looking to have a printed copy, then please do be in touch with the BFRE office. Our intent is to make this information readily available. We will have another meeting coming up in April, but before that we'll have the preparedness events, April 12th and 13th, so please mark your calendars. Plan on coming out to learn something, to perhaps eat something, and to kind of have a community spirit downtown. We're going to have, like I said, a whole bunch of preparedness activities, so it'll be a good chance to touch base with your neighbors or with residents across the community. Thank you for coming out tonight. We are done.